knowledge that the sacred land on which Smiths Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We're also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in the making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smiths Falls. We're mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. I'll ask for any amendments to the agenda. Lindsay, you sent an email out a few moments ago. Did you want to add that as an agenda item?
If it's possible, and there's room on the agenda today, I would like to, yes.
Okay, so we'll add that 6D development charges. Carrie?
Yep. If
Okay,
we could just, if we could have someone move and second the amended agenda.
Yes, oh, sorry, Vicky, you have a proposed amendment?
Yeah, I was wondering as well if we could add, I don't know how to word it, but there's a few people in deep crisis right now that need immediate housing, all ends of the spectrum. And I have their numbers and availability. I just need a place. If we could talk about that, that'd be great.
So let's add 6E, I guess, emergency housing, or we'll leave it at that, I guess, probably for a title. Okay, I have a motion for adoption of the approval of the agenda. Moved by Vicky, seconded by Ellie. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Ask for a motion for adoption of the minutes from our January 19th meeting. Moved by Vicky, seconded by Jeff. All in favor? That's carried as well. Thank you. Okay, ask for disclosure of monetary interest. I don't see any. You can declare later in the meeting if that should arise. And we're fortunate today to have Allison Tutak here. She's a director of community and social services for Leeds Granville, and she's going to talk about housing incentives in Leeds Granville. So welcome, Allison. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I've come today, and I have done just a brief PowerPoint presentation, which I provided to Carrie. And thank you, Carrie, for being able to show it. Sometimes my technical abilities and the sharing of the screen, I'm not always successful. So thank you.
Can you see it there now, Allison?
Yes, I can see it. Yeah. So in terms of, so the mayor identified, I'm coming from Leeds and Granville, and the presentation I prepared specifically on the topic of secondary suites. And then yesterday I was a bit worried that maybe you were wanting maybe something broader. So I have my secondary suites, but I'm always open to questions. So if there's something outside of secondary suites and I can provide information, please. Apologies if I went too narrow in my focus for the presentation.
Oh, that's fine, Allison. Please proceed.
So in terms of secondary suites, this topic, and I see that it's coming up later on your agenda, this is very new for us. And in fact, we haven't yet launched. So on the third slide, I just have noted that we have not yet launched our program. And we've been the past, starting in September of 2020, we began a housing advisory committee, and it was made up of all of County's Council as well as our separated partners. And they met for approximately 14 months. And one of the significant strategies coming out of that was to launch a secondary suites program. So we've just finished finalizing our approach and our policy on secondary suites. And we're hoping to launch in April of this year, pending final budget approvals for 2022. And when we had our housing advisory committee, we heard from many other municipalities in Ontario as to some of the strategies that they were undertaking. And it was specifically the areas of Grey Bruce counties, Kingston and Simcoe that really helped to inform us. I think Simcoe has had a fair bit of success in their secondary suites program in contributing to the number of new affordable housing units in their community. So we're hopeful that launching into this strategy may help to also increase our supply of affordable housing. So the next slide speaks to our goals and why we've looked at going down the route of a policy on secondary suites. We need more affordable units in our community. I think it's almost impossible to find a community in Ontario that isn't in need, and in most cases dire need, of more units that are affordable to the people that need to find a place to live. Not even in just accordance with the definition of affordable, depending which definition you adhere to. And creating a program to subsidize it was just seen as, it's one thing if a municipality enables it from a planning perspective, but then to try to incentivize it, can we get more interest from the community in creating secondary suites? Then the next slide is, so with respect to planning. So initially when we were approaching the topic of secondary suites and we heard from other municipalities, we thought of it similar to our first time home ownership program or our interior renovates program. And if we create a program, it'll be wonderful and it'll be easy. Forgetting, of course, when you're from the social services sides of things, that there's a planning aspect to this. And so we quickly realized that we needed to back up, have better engagement with both our county planners as well as with our townships in terms of where they were at in their policies and approaches to allowing secondary suites in their communities. This is certainly, I am not well versed in planning. So if you have any questions with respect to this, I may have to defer or go ask our planner. But we've had to make some changes to the county's official plan. And so those steps have now been done so that we are in a better position come April. We also realize that, the importance as we move forward in the discussion of affordable housing, that we in the world of housing services, social services, we do need to have longer term, better conversations happening on a regular basis with our planning departments as it relates to affordable housing and policies related to affordable housing and how we can better work together. So that's been a really good part of our housing advisory committee that we've had and the opportunities that may have for us moving forward in the future. So we're finding that many of our communities and many of our townships and separated municipalities want to encourage and enable secondary suites. And then the programs that we're going to offer is that subsidization thereof to try and encourage it. So the next slide outlines that we're taking a two-pronged approach. And we're looking at really two different programs to incentivize secondary suites. The first is a residential program. So those people who reside in their home, they might have a space that could be converted into a secondary suite at the location where they live. And so this is the first prong that we're taking. The second one that we're looking at is a small landlord program, really looking at those small landlords who may have opportunities that they could also expand or renovate to create additional units. And that looking at both of those two groups, question being is that will that result in possibly the creation of additional secondary suites? So I'm just going to go into some of the criteria that we've set and some of the approaches that we're looking to do for both of these two streams. Keeping in mind that we still don't have the answers because we haven't launched it yet. So we're just very hopeful that how we're approaching it. Many of the program features we have ripped off and duplicated from some of the other areas, whether Simcoe, Kingston, Grey Bruce, Muskoka, some of those other areas. We kind of looked at their policies, took what we saw as maybe best working in Leeds and Grenville, and that's really how we've landed at where we have. In terms of the funding, so this is the homeowner program or the residential program. So this is the program targeted for people who own a home that may have a space that can be converted. Maximum funding of up to $25,000. Those funds can be used for pretty much any aspect of construction or some of the soft costs with respect to drawings, etc. Must result in the creation of a unit that did not previously exist. So if there was already a unit existing in the home, but it fell into disrepair, it would not qualify. It's really the addition of a new unit that is currently not in existence, so that we're really getting to our goal of new unit creation. The $25,000 would be forgivable after 20 years, and it would amortize equally over each year of the 20 years, a declining balance. There would be no asset or income limits for the homeowner, with the exception that they cannot own other property. There would be a registered lien on the property, and this is very similar to our Ontario Renovates and our home ownership programs. The tenant that would be moving into the unit would have to meet the affordability criteria of our housing programs. And the rent that is allowed to be charged on the unit, in keeping with most of our provincial programs, would be 80% of the average market rent. And annually, we're advised of that annual market rent by CMHC for our respective areas. The second prong approach that we're doing is, once again, with the landlords. And so the small landlord program. So on the next page, oh, I'm still on the homeowner program. Sorry, I'm switching gears. Sorry, I did mean to go to the next slide, Carrie. I just, I thought I only had one page per program.
You want to go to the next slide, Allison?
Yes, thank you, Carrie. So in the homeowner program, we're actually using funds through the Ontario Priorities Housing Initiative. So these are provincial dollars that we receive through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And some of the qualities of this program are dictated by the guidelines as set by the ministry. And so this program is going to be funded with the provincial dollars. And so the period of affordability, we do have some, they set a minimum, and we have set our affordability period at 20 years, meaning that the homeowner is expected to maintain the unit for a 20-year period at an affordable rental rate. We've allocated $250,000 for this particular project in 2022. And the OFI funds, we used our OFI funds for a variety of various programs, much like Lanark County does, home ownership, Ontario Renovates, housing allowances. So in dedicating this amount of money to secondary suites, it's less money that we have to go into those other programs. So it's all a balance. But we thought it would be worthwhile trying it for 2022 and see our success. So the next slide is going into the area with the small landlord program. We've set the funding still at the $25,000. This one's a little bit different in that we're looking at a 50% penalty of the loan balance if the default is in the first 5 years. And this was really designed to prevent applications coming into the program for people that may be looking to upgrade a property and then do a quick sale. That our goal is really to, have the affordable units and for them to stay in existence for a period of time. The affordability period is set at only 15 years versus the 20 of the other program. And for the small landlord program, we're defining a small landlord as someone who owns 10 or less units. Similar to the other program, that $25,000 can be used towards the construction costs and the soft costs, must result in a new unit, a registered lien on the property, similar to the other program. Tenant must meet the affordable criteria similarly, and rent has to be at 80% of average market rent as well. So some strong similarities to the other program. The main differences is the affordability period and also the penalty if there is a default or a sale of the property within the first 5 years. This particular program, we are not able to use provincial dollars for this program. And so we have requested through our budget for 2022 an allocation of funds to support the small landlord program. And we've dedicated $300,000 to this program, an additional $12,000 for the legal fees, registration of liens, those types of costs. So we're at this point, we're looking to hopefully implement in April, monitor, hope for the best. I think our nervousness is I think the amount of money that's allocated to this and recognizing how much work is involved for homeowners and small landlords to construct or implement the creation of a secondary suites, between the planning, the cost, the drawings, getting permits, getting tenants in place, getting contractors to complete the work if you're needing to use contractors. There's so many steps in place. How long does it actually take to launch a program like this, provide some incentives, and how long does it take for the unit to actually be created in an existence? So those are some of the unknowns we don't know at this point, but we're very hopeful. I think when our committee was meeting, the secondary suites and not having a secondary suites program was seen as a possible missed opportunity within our community, recognizing that many homeowners, may be residing in homes that are too large, may already, have homes that have natural space within them that could be converted to secondary suites, and may not have even thought about it. And perhaps even launching a program may help their consideration of this option to create additional housing options in their community. So we're approaching the year and are hoping for the best. But this is a little bit of our history of how we've gotten into the discussion of secondary suites. So happy to take any questions on either what we're planning for this or any of our other housing programs that we might have here in Leeds and Grenville that may be of possible interest.
Well, thanks so much, Allison. And knowing we have usually a pretty talkative group here who are armed with questions, I'm sure there will be some for you. I know I have a couple, but I'll turn to the group first for questions for Allison regarding this or any other of the programs that Leeds Grenville provides. Ms. Lorraine?
Allison, thank you very much. That was interesting. At this point in time, what's the interest that's already been shown in moving forward?
So we haven't yet gone out with a public launch of the program, but it has been talked about a little bit in the newspapers, just because of the natural committee meetings and the media reporting on, committee meetings. So thus far, the interest has only kind of, gone out in a limited way, but we've already probably had about 10 just cold inquiries coming in from the community saying, hey, I want to apply for that, or how do I go about applying for that? Or I heard about this, can I learn more about it? So we've taken the names of about 10 people that we've promised to get back to as soon as we get the passage of our budget. But aside, and I wouldn't say that represents maybe the complete interest in the community, just given that we haven't done a formal promotion yet of the program.
If it's okay, one more question. Whose responsibility is it within the municipality? Is this part of planning in your Department of Planning, or?
So the administration of the incentives, so the $25,000 in both of those programs, it's actually being administered by the community housing department inside the counties. Now, we certainly recognize that there may be some folks may be interested in creating a secondary suite separate and apart from any of our programs or from the incentive program. We recognize that some homeowners may hear about the idea and they may say, oh yeah, I never thought about that. And I might want to create a secondary suite, but they may not necessarily want to access the funds that we have available because there's conditions that come with it. And we recognize that sometimes homeowners don't like the idea that a lien would be placed on their home, or that they would have to be limited to only charging, the affordable rental rates. So even if it results in more people considering secondary suites, even without the financial incentives, that's still, I think, a good thing for the community.
For sure. Thank you.
Vicky?
There we go. Thank you for your presentation. I have a two-part question. It said tenant must meet affordability criteria. What's that exactly? And why do they have to be set at 80% of market rent? Is there any way to let the landlord control that? Because I feel some like to charge what actual affordable rent is, and 80% of market rent is not that. 30% of one's income is affordability.
So your first part of your question?
It was, what does it mean when tenants must meet affordability criteria?
Right. So when we have tenants come on to our affordable housing wait list, there's some basic criteria in terms of Canadian citizenship and age. You must be over the age of 18 to come to our affordability list. We also take into account at that time in terms of income and assets. So it's essentially coming on to our affordable list. We consider in terms of, we look at the household income limits that the province sets for us as well. And so that helps us in determining who is in need of affordable housing based mainly upon the income. With respect to the housing rates and the affordability, so this is always a difficult. The first program that we're doing is the residential program, and the residential program we're using the OFI dollars to fund, and which are provincial dollars coming from municipal affairs and housing. So with us using those ministry dollars, the definition of affordability, that being 80% of average market rent, is dictated. That is told to us by the ministry as a minimum in terms of setting the affordability. So that is dictated. We could do something else in the residential, in the landlord program. We would have the flexibility to set it at something different than that, because it is being municipally funded and we're not having to adhere to provincial rules or provincial guidelines. So we have a significantly greater flexibility within that program. The question in terms of letting landlords set the rents, and I think if somebody wants to create a secondary suite without accessing the $25,000 subsidy, then they certainly have that ability to be able to set their own rents and administer their secondary suite within the community. But we're looking at the $25,000 subsidization, and what is it in exchange that we're getting back for the investment of that $25,000? And so we're looking at it as getting a less than market rent unit for our community for a period of 20 years for the residential program or 15 years for the landlord program. So it's really in terms of what we're getting back. If landlords or residential homeowners want to create these and wanted to be able to set their own rates, then they would need to look at making those investments in the creation of those units.
Thank you so much.
Jeff? Oh, Jeff, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Great program, Allison. I'm curious, what percentage of your total budget does this represent? And how did you come to choose the figure you came to?
Yeah, so the with respect to the residential program, as noted, we're using provincial ministry funds. So our entire OFI allocation on an annual basis, I think this year is roughly about 650,000 roughly is our OFI allocation from the province. And so we chose the number of 250 just to try to create a balance, because we didn't want to invest all of it into that program, because we want to continue to offer our homeownership program, our interior renovates, and our housing allowances. So just in kind of doing the divide, there was no real science to it other than ensuring that we're still able to do some of those other core programs that we've been doing for a number of years. With respect to the small landlord program, because that is 100% municipal dollars, because we don't have the ability to use any of the OFI provincial dollars for that. The number of 300,000 is really just us looking at what we were going to be able to do, recognizing we're not starting to April, how many units would that equate to, and just kind of doing an estimate to start someplace. In terms of our like $300,000 within our entire community housing budget, usually 1% within our housing budget, I think, equals approximately 470,000. So it's not quite a full percentage necessarily within our housing budget and in our overall county budget. 300,000, I forget what the percentage at the end would have been in the broader county budget. The number also corresponds, because we've had a tight budget year, but we had some surplus funds from 2021, which were about 320,000. So we're using some of last year's surplus to help fund 2022. So there's a little bit of thankfulness that we had a surplus last year to enable us to trial the program this year before actually impacting the tax base for 2023 if we were to continue.
So you can make a difference, and it's not that large a commitment. Hopefully you can do this going forward and increase it as well.
Yeah, we'll see certainly the uptake and whether or not it makes sense to increase it. Both, we could increase it on both the OFI funded, the provincially funded side, as well as the municipally funded side. We do have the potential to increase. If we were to increase, and even doing it this year, we're taking away from other things. So in OFI, it's less housing allowances that we can issue. It's less, Ontario renovates applications we can consider. So it's all doing the balance and figuring out which programs are the most valuable and do we get the most bang for the buck in creating affordable housing in our community. And, ideally, if you were able to do a little bit of everything and everything was contributing, then you have more to evaluate in terms of that long-term effectiveness. Not having done it and not sure yet of the uptake, it's difficult to assess that at this stage.
Are you hearing from the usual suspects, the landlords, the developers, and how do they feel about it?
Yeah, so we're not hearing from developers, and I expect that because of the nature of defining small landlords as 10 units or less, we are not likely to, because we really wanted to create an opportunity for the small landlords versus developers. Quite often, in prior affordable housing projects, developers are really looking at the profitability of a project and larger projects. And that's really not what we're intending to do with our launch of this program. It's really intended for kind of those quick wins, early opportunities that small landlords or residential homeowners might be able to move on in a fairly quick manner. and that it's not a business or it's not a large scale business with respect to that.
Thanks.
Okay, Lindsay, you're next.
Yeah, hi. I just had one thought, which I have a concern. I don't think $25,000 will be enough to really create a new unit. But that aside, for the process of monitoring it, when we're talking about creating a new residential unit, that's going to involve new plumbing and new mechanical, and those normally trigger a building permit. So have you tied in the monitoring of the use of these funds with, you know, them not being issued until occupancy has been granted? And is that a control measure that you've thought of? Because most times, if you're going to add in a washroom or add in a kitchen sink, that's new plumbing, and under the code, you have to pull a building permit. So I'm just wondering what the protocol is in terms of how you've decided to release the funds and if it's tied in with the building inspection.
Yes, so the release of the funds would be upon the completion of the unit. We have looked at, you know, the options of in some affordable housing projects will release so much, you know, upfront in a project and so much upon completion. Sometimes, you know, we have that, you know, 20% in the beginning if you can verify the soft costs and those types of things. So if there's an approval of a project, the concern is about the completion of the project in terms of, you know, going through the effort of registering a lien. Did the project get completed? And I certainly, you know, hear what you're saying in terms of the amount of money. For some people, $25,000 may not be sufficient if you're creating a new unit, and that does involve plumbing and electrical and building, or if you're building onto a building, it may be possibly enough to do some renovations. If you're, you know, creating, let's say, a basement apartment and your basement already has plumbing in it, excuse me. And so for some people it may be sufficient, and for some it may not be.
I guess my one follow-up question, and I had to run and do something with my dog at one point during your presentation, so I may have missed it, and I apologize. You register a lien for those monies? Is that what you're saying? Before you forgive it? My thought process on that is most people will want to borrow some money in order to help pay for the rest of that construction. But a lien technically always has to be paid out or resolved before a lender will advance. So, like, I'm just wondering about those issues that will likely come up because a borrower or someone that uses these monies may receive them. They may have to go get financing. They'd have to pay out this lien. How do we deal with that? That's just kind of what's coming to mind.
Yeah, and absolutely, that's a great point. And we currently do that process on all of our Ontario Renovates applications and also our home ownership applications. And so what often happens is that people are needing at some later time to, let's say, borrow monies, and we have an existing you know, lien on the property, we will take a second position. May not be using the correct legal term, but we will take a second position with respect to the lien. So it doesn't have to be paid out, but we'll take a second position to the bank on any of those liens.
Awesome. Thank you.
Allison, just, I guess, curious, have any of the lower tiers indicated any desire, willingness to go further? In other words, create a single tier, lower tier program that would complement the county's program? Not
that I'm aware of. We have not heard of that. We have heard, you know, a couple of municipalities are concerned about, you know, some of the, you know, finer details of secondary suites within their communities. For example, parking. Something we wouldn't have, you know, kind of thought of, and the concerns about, you know, parking. And here we are encouraging secondary suites, but perhaps the home isn't located in, an area of town in which there's adequate parking available. Some of those other concerns about that, but I'm not aware of any interest at this time of creating something that would be in addition and complementary to kind of what we have at this point. My sense is that they're looking to see how this goes in 2022 and see whether we learn from it. And maybe from there, maybe they might consider something in addition.
And on the surface, it looks, quite attractive. And if a $25,000 incentive creates a new below market rent unit, that's probably at 10% of the cost of creating a new market rent, a new unit anywhere in the county. Considering probably $300,000 to build a new apartment today. So if it works, obviously it's great value and great payback for the broader community, for the people who can live there. And as much as I think we'd like to see more RGI, I think in order for this to work on an RGI basis, it probably would require an ongoing, obviously an agreement with the county and subsidization from the county on an ongoing basis. But that's something that may be worth considering in the future when you're looking at an increasing number of RGI units. If you're going to subsidize, I guess probably cheaper to subsidize existing units than it would be to have to build new units and then subsidize them, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Joanne.
You just said it, like, wouldn't it be cheaper to try and look at some landlords to see if subsidizing a unit that already exists so that they're not losing their units would be better than trying to create more units? Because right now there is a shortage of apartments, but there also a shortage of affordable housing. So, if more money could be put into subsidies, maybe it can help people stay in their homes and have a more affordable place to live than creating more homes.
Yeah, great point. And, we have such a wide spectrum of what we're seeing as kind of these, really varying needs of folks. And I love the housing allowance program, and I'm sure your committee probably is familiar with housing allowances, and that's really a program that allows us to subsidize people where they currently live to make their rent more affordable. And the housing allowance program is very similar to what you're suggesting, is where people are living now, and if they're in a safe location now with a rent that may just be a little higher than what their income allows them to sustain, a housing allowance program is an ideal, because you've just enabled someone to have affordable housing by providing them a small subsidy on a monthly basis to make that affordable. And sometimes we forget that is creating affordable housing. A small subsidy is somebody in an existing, private rental type situation. I think one of the pressures we're facing, in many of the communities in Ontario, is there just doesn't seem to be enough housing. And so, people are, not necessarily just on the topic of homelessness, but even couch surfing and finding the spots. When we were looking at our social housing wait list, for example, we did a survey it was about just prior to COVID. I don't remember when that was, but when we did that, we asked them questions, given where you're living now, if you had some type of allowance, would you stay where you are living? And because we were thinking, perhaps if we invested more in our housing allowances, we could decrease our housing wait list for RGI housing. And we were surprised at the number of people in that survey that said, no, I still want to be on your housing wait list, because not only is my rent not affordable, but I really, where I'm living, I may not like the location. I don't like the neighborhood. It's not where I want to continue living. I only came here because, the rent I could get, I could squeak by. I really want to remain on the housing wait list. So we were surprised at how many people that we provide a housing allowance to still want to be able to come into counties owned and operated community housing, which was interesting to us. But it is how do we create more units? And we're finding more and more landlords right now, especially, I don't know how it is in Smith Falls, but here in Leeds and Grenville, 1-bedroom units that people used to be able to get, for let's say $800 a month, landlords are asking $1,200. And so all of a sudden we don't have, not that 800 was affordable for many people, but 1,200 is like way out of the question of affordability, especially if you're in receipt of OW or ODSP in our community. So, we need more units of housing, for folks that, especially of limited means and income.
Thanks, Allison. And just to that point, the study came out, I think, 2 weeks ago, the national level indicating, and it boiled down to the provincial level, for Ontario, based on our population and based on the number of homes we have per capita, is 1.2 million homes short, residential units short of where the supply should be. So if we apply that to a population of 14 million people in Ontario, it's not quite 10%, I would say it's 8%. If that was the case in Smith Falls, we are probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 units short. We have a lot of development going on, but we don't have 800 units under development. And again, to the point made here, how many of these units will be even remotely affordable? Ellie, I'll let you go next.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on, that I guess, have you guys thought about, when you say you were surprised, I think a lot of people would be surprised that, individuals were still choosing to remain on the social housing waitlist. But I think that speaks to the volume of individuals who are living in inadequate, inappropriate, inaccessible housing, right? They're living in housing with mold or cockroaches or whichever unsafe housing because they have no other choice. So has there been anything that's, been thought of or put forward to ensure that individuals, landlords are maintaining these buildings? I guess from my perspective, I'm thinking these individuals are probably thinking, well, if I go into social housing, I'm going to have a decent landlord who's going to, maintain the property. Has there been anything to look at, policy in regards to how to ensure that landlords are maintaining that, standard of practice or standard of the units?
So in a very broad way, I'd say the answer is no, in that, if somebody's in the community and they're renting from a private landlord, aside from any local bylaws that maybe, the cities or the townships may have, certainly we as the county and as the community housing department don't have a role with respect to that. The exception to that is that we do have a number of rent supplement agreements for the provision of rent geared to income assistance with private landlords. And in those circumstances, we do inspect units in advance of entering into agreements with landlords. And we do inspect those units upon, when that tenant may leave, and we may be preparing for a new tenant. So, but that's because we're in a contractual relationship with that landlord as it relates to the rent supplement agreement. So hence we have a basis upon which, we're going in to inspect that unit prior to occupancy of an RGI tenant. But in general, I think it would really be up to looking at kind of our area's bylaws with respect to the conditions of those buildings or homes.
And then, sorry, just to kind of add on there, have you noticed a decline in your, contracts with landlords for rent supplements? Like, have you been noticing that a lot of landlords have been, deciding to go in a different route or not continuing with their contract in regards to the rent supplements, because then A, they can charge more, but B, they can, do as they please? Yes,
absolutely. we have a number of landlords who we continue to have really good relationships, and I've actually been amazed at how many have decided to stay with us. So, you know, kudos to them, because, you know, in all honesty, they're somewhat doing a bit of a community service, you know, by, you know, choosing to stay in a rent supplement arrangement with us. Thankfully, we do have some rent supplement arrangements with some, you know, non-profit housing providers whose operating agreements have expired. So those ones, of course, are usually more reliable and predictable. So that's been really good as well. We've definitely noticed a decrease in the number of landlords calling us to, you know, want to come into rent supplement agreements. It's usually us approaching them. We've noticed a decrease. I think one of the other things we've really noticed in the last couple of years are the number of private landlords who may have rooming houses or small units choosing to sell their properties. And so this isn't necessarily with respect to community housing, but just keeping in mind that, you know, we administer Ontario Works as well, that many of our Ontario Works clients, we're seeing many people coming in who've been in the same place for 11 years. And now all of a sudden they have no home, and because the landlord has sold the property. And we've been quite taken back by just how many units we estimate have been lost in our community due to the sale of properties.
Of course, there's no home out there they can afford now.
Yep, and you know, and they may have found something affordable, or, you know, somewhat affordable for them and in a good location, and all of a sudden it's gone. You know, we had one situation in which a rooming house, you know, so, you know, those rents are, you know, roughly between $400 and $500 per month, you know, and this rooming house had very stable tenants within it. And like some of those tenants had been there 13 years. No one had been there less than 2 years. So a very stable rooming house. The property was sold, and all of a sudden we had 8 people, and their options in our community to go anywhere and live for $450 a month, it doesn't exist. So their lives were totally turned upside down because they are now in a position with no affordable options available to them. And a social housing wait list too, right? That's, you know, many years long.
What do you have solutions? Before I go to Lindsay, do you have solutions that you can apply there? I mean, I suppose you can apply a portable housing benefit, I guess, if you have some of those available. Or what can you guys do to help?
I'd say the most that we're able to do to assist, I mean, we have our housing allowance program, which is similar to a portable housing benefit, that we're able to offer people if we have any funds remaining there in that account. We have a dedicated amount of funds on an annual basis. And, you know, once we expend, you know, the allocation, we don't have any more to give out. So it really depends upon timing of those applications and whether there's any funds available in a housing allowance program. The only other program which isn't a long-term sustainable option is we do have it's called a homelessness prevention benefit. So we will assist someone with first and last month's rent, utility deposits, you know, some of those pieces at the beginning of, you know, getting a new place, but that doesn't make the monthly rent affordable to somebody.
No, stuff. Lindsay?
I think one thing to, I just want to, I guess, give a comment on, which is, you know, pilot programs, you never know what's going to happen. And I think, you know, the fact that something's being implemented within your county is great. Whether or not there's going to be some things that go right and go wrong. And I still think that, for example, let's say someone takes 25,000 and they create a unit, but then they don't use it towards creating an affordable unit. They've still injected into a rental supply of housing. And I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind, is the more that we can inject supply of rental housing, not new housing, but rental housing, it will have an impact. So again, the more supply, you know, it's just going to help with a bit of pricing. And I see that as a benefit. So, you know, again, like I have some concerns about whether or not the success will really be towards affordable units based off of what it costs to create a unit, these with construction and labor. But it's still, by creating an affordable or a rental unit, you're injecting into a supply that's like depleted. And I don't think people put enough focus on rental supply. You know, a lot of the announcements by the governments and such are normally just towards new housing, but not rental housing. And so I like this because it is focused on rental housing. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. And nonetheless, hopefully it does create more rental housing. And obviously it'd be great if it went towards those for affordability, but if it still just went into the market, I still think there'll be some successes from it.
And if I could just comment, I think, you know, that's a really, really good point about rental housing. I think sometimes when we get into the conversations about creating new housing, sometimes we hear the conversations about how do we better encourage home ownership, and people, you know, want to get to home ownership, and how do we do programs that create that. And when we look at the folks that are struggling the most in our community, they're not saying, hey, I want a home. They just want a safe place to live, something that's safe and affordable to them. And I think sometimes, I think home ownership is a great thing, but it's not everyone's thing, and that's not everyone's priority. And we really need the rental stock within our communities to help the people that are of lowest income at this time. Like the need is right now for people to be able to be safe. And absolutely, as soon as we add to the rental stock, and you know, if you add to rental stock, and even if it's higher end rentals, you know, without any subsidy, and somebody creates higher end rentals, hopefully the people that are, you know, at the point of wanting to go to those higher end rentals, they're leaving units that are then available for people of lower incomes. So as you know, the more supply you have, the greater it's going to be in terms of options and opportunities, and adding to the stock is good no matter which way you cut it.
Thanks, Allison. Vicki.
I think with the rental market being as stressed as it is, and us requiring so many units that we don't have, I think affordable home ownership would be something to definitely explore, because myself as a renter, I would love a home to call my own. And I often hear from many renters, the complaint is they're paying more than average mortgages around here and in rent. And, you know, if they can afford that, why can't they afford a mortgage? It's the barriers around home ownership need to be improved. And I really think that it would lessen the stress on the rental market if we were to continue people on the housing continuum.
No, absolutely. And the homeownership programs, is when COVID hit, our applications to the homeownership program have decreased significantly. We have very few applications to our homeownership program, because what we're hearing from people is that trying to get into the homeownership market right now, compared to 3 or 4 years ago, is totally different. And that, you know, you're competing and going $100,000 above asking prices, that it just has taken the affordability of home ownership off the table for many people, which is very unfortunate. And if, you know, home ownership programs, you know, that we offer and that most places in Ontario, you know, in accordance with the provincial guidelines offer, I mean, it assists with the down payment, but in supporting people long-term into home ownership, I think there's more that needs to be done to support people in getting into home ownership. It's not necessarily all about the money. Sometimes they also need the assistance even navigating our financial institutions and the applications for mortgages and going through that process. There's almost, you know, some of that financial literacy that goes with going down the path of figuring out the mortgage system, and then, you know, being able to work with, you know, a real estate agent if you're in that market, and the opportunities to get in. But unfortunately, it just seems to have been not an option for so many people now.
Well, of course, Allison, too, the other benefit of having a secondary suite in your home is that rental income can bridge that gap between not being able to afford a home and actually being able to afford one. So it really is a double benefit for homeowners who would exercise this opportunity.
It may make it affordable for them.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, so thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and your presentation, your wisdom today. We've got a few more items on the agenda we're going to move ahead with, and they somewhat relate. So if you want to stick around, you're welcome to stick around. The next one we're going to talk about is incentives for secondary suites, and Carlton Place has recently announced that incentive. And Carrie, do you have that staff report to council from Carlton Place available?
I do. Just give me a second to bring it up. If you want to go ahead, Mayor Panko, I will bring it up momentarily.
So Perth implemented a plan in 2019, which will provide a $5,000 incentive for a secondary suite. And in that situation, my understanding is that had not a lot of uptake, and it has affordable provisions built into it. And Carlton Place just recently has passed a similar, or established a similar program with a $5,000 incentive, but does not build affordability parameters around it. So they budgeted $25,000 in 2022, as indicated here. And so that would be for potential for 5 applicants to get support to create a secondary suite. So as we move forward, this is really combining, I guess, prior item A and B here. I would like to see us at some point in time in the not so distant future, make that recommendation as to what we believe may be fair and appropriate. And of course, we are in the midst of developing an affordable housing community improvement plan, which will provide the mechanism we can then utilize to provide incentives. But I'd like to have a discussion on really what we believe is the most suitable amount. I mean, obviously 25,000 in Leeds Grenville is significantly higher than what's being provided by Carlton Place at Perth. And is this something that makes more sense that it be supported at the county level? I mean, if it was at Leonard County level, the same as Leeds Grenville, 25,000, an additional 5 from a lower tier, single tier, it goes further to try and help bridge that gap and to create an affordable opportunity. So here, we just scroll down, but essentially I think I've covered the gist of it here. Definitions of residential units, and I say in the situation, it's up to 50% of the construction cost to a maximum 5,000. And the criteria is there, but it can't be registered in an existing unit, it has to be creation of a new unit. But as I mentioned, with Carlton Place, they decided not to proceed with any affordability provisions around that. So open the floor for discussion. Jeff?
Mary, you mentioned that there's a similar project in Perth and it hasn't had a lot of uptake. How long has it been in place? And I'd be curious to hear from Perth what they think is maybe not working well with their program before we implement something in Smith Falls. It'd be good to have some background information from Perth, because maybe there's just some little thing that needs to be tweaked. It's great. I'm really happy that Carlton Place has done that. I think it's important that the parameters around affordability be in place. That's what's good about what's happening in Leeds Grenville. But I'd be curious about how long the one in Perth has been in place. It's probably about a year now, I think. And
yeah, 2 years. I think 2019 it was brought into existence. Not sure when it was actually effective, but we can do some research and come back with that for probably our next meeting, so we have some understanding, and we can also see how many applicants they have and how many they have approved.
You know, it's always nice to see these provisions on the books, but if there's something that's an impediment from people actually following through with getting engaged, then there's something wrong. So I'd be curious to know.
Well, I guess Lindsay, you put a comment in the chat there. Do you want to expand upon that?
Yeah, $5,000 I think is what was mentioned that Perth offered. It's just, I mean, I just paid a $5,000 building permit fee for a development for 2 units. And in order to get that, I had to spend $15,000 from various engineers and surveyors. I mean, it's just not enough money. And unfortunately, there needs to be a strong correlation between money being advanced only if you obtain a building permit. And those building permits are going to cost you money. Now, maybe those fees can be waived, but it's just $5,000. I mean, what are we building at now? $180 a square foot before HST is the cost to build. If you're building yourself, that would be like my cost to build. I mean, $170 and $180 a square foot. So it's just not enough money to be anywhere realistic. I think the money would be good to be used towards upfitting existing rental units that could use a cosmetic upgrade and then go towards rent-to-gear income affordability, but it's just not enough at all. So I think it's just figuring out what amount of money will entice someone, finding someone with like morals to want to just do it. Because it does cost a lot of money to add that based off of just construction cost and labor. And again, out of comments I think Ellie made in our last agenda item, like we also need to make sure that these units are safe, and that's correlated with building inspections. The building inspector is going to go in and he's going to make sure you have 2 appropriate fire exits. He's going to make sure you have a working smoke alarm and CO2 alarm. He's going to make sure you have proper venting from your stove. He's going to make sure you have hot and cold water. And so it's super important that these be correlated to building permits, I think. But it's just not enough money. And it's figuring out, I think, do you try to promote these programs to existing potential units because that cost is a bit lower because they're existing? I don't know. That's just my comments.
Thank you. I suppose it would vary from someone who maybe has a finished basement now that they want to make some conversions. Maybe put a small kitchen in and a second and a private entrance to someone who's got a completely maybe empty building basement now that they would have to spend an awful lot more to convert. So there is probably a range as well. Joanne.
I mentioned this a long time ago, and it goes with what Lindsay just said, is that, like sometimes people are not happy where they are because the building is in poor maintenance, and trying to get, like I've seen going into apartments where the ceiling, the insulation was falling, so they had to block off 1 bedroom. So they had converted the living room into the parents' bedroom and taken the master bedroom for the children because their secondary bedroom was not livable. The insulation was falling from the ceiling. Also, I had another person where if they turned the hallway light on, it would blow the bathroom light. And even going to the building inspector, they still approved the rental. So like a lot of times we're saying, we need more rental units and we need more affordable rental units, but we also need accountable landlords that are not slumlords so that people feel safe. And that's why I say sometimes it's not always about building and expanding. It's also making sure that it's livable conditions that they are living in.
Thanks, Joanne. And to the point, well, so many be landlord tenant civil issues. we are also in the process of rewriting our property standards bylaw, and my hope is that some of those factors can be considered in the redrafting of that bylaw to provide better protections for our tenant citizens. Additional thoughts or comments here, Lindsay?
The only thing I would say still is similar to what I said to Allison, which is if it prompts people to add rental supply, it's still a good thing. I just obviously have concerns about it supplying affordable units, but again, any encouragement to someone who owns a single dwelling home and has a basement that they could add a kitchen and a few things to, or convert a garage of some kind, it's still a great thing. There's always going to be downfalls and stuff. So I think the biggest thing is to try to pilot stuff, which I think what's presented is better than nothing. And it'll be really interesting to see how that unfolds. And so if the town of Smith Falls does something, again, it's all about doing a pilot project in a way to see if there is success and how we're measuring that success. And it may just be, did it create rental supply? And that should still be called a success.
And Allison, do you have any insight from Simcoe or Grey Bruce on how successful their similar programs have been?
Simcoe certainly indicated great success with their secondary suites program. Simcoe, I think, has done a very good job at promoting their program. It is mainly targeted at the residential versus the landlord option, certainly at homeowners. So they've certainly, they thought it was a game changer for them. We are familiar that Kingston has also, launched a program with not the same level of success. And so they're currently reviewing some of their guidelines to see whether or not maybe adjusting some of that might possibly result in more interest.
And do you know if the dollar amount in Simcoe is 25,000? Is that what you're modeled after?
Simcoe is 30,000. So we went just a little bit lower.
Okay. And I guess to the group here, I wonder if it merits some market research. In other words, do we reach out to our homeowners in town to see if they're, with a fairly simple survey, to see if there would be an interest in creating a secondary unit, and then how that interest may vary based on different levels of financial support, and the potential reduction of fees and barriers. And Carl, I wouldn't mind if you could chime in from a planning standpoint. It's probably more of a building issue than planning, but how cumbersome the process would be for someone to add a secondary suite. And it could be, again, it could be inside the building, could be outside, right? But and is there, would we provide sort of design guidelines and a method of making it easy? And again, for a lot of people, maybe it may seem to be too burdensome to even consider it if the end doesn't mean much financial opportunity for them as a homeowner, and it's a lot of steps to go through to get there.
Yeah, so it depends very much on the nature of the construction and what's already on site, if it's easy to or feasible. So the municipalities that have offered $5,000 certainly aren't looking at this as being covering all or even a significant part of the cost. It's my understanding is they're looking at it just spreading out the opportunity to give more people the opportunity to at least get something. So that's helpful in that regard. So I think in terms of the feasibility in an individual circumstance, we'd obviously have to look at that. I think it's probably easier to if it's a newer build or retrofit something within an existing dwelling as opposed to building an addition or building a detached suite. But certainly that would depend on the building department, and the fire department would need to do those inspections and make sure that the that everything's in place. And the odd time we see applications come in for homes that already have that secondary suite already in there, and everything's planned accordingly without the retrofit. And certainly that obviously makes things a little bit easier. You're not trying to wedge something in or change an existing system.
Thank you. And I guess safe to assume with anything major, there would be in all probability the engineering and design work required for the building permit. Okay. Thank you. Back to Lindsay.
I will comment again when we think about how we can make it successful. I think the thing that can be done is maybe focus the program on some very likely examples. So Sean, you even mentioned a basement conversion. I think using an example of, do you own a house with a basement that has nothing in it? You know, these are, you know, this is an option that you can explore. Help highlight what the options are for in a secondary unit, which would also be compliant within like the building code and various other things. And then even provides to people, do you have 8-foot clearance? Because if you don't, I don't know if you'd want to spend money to underpin and dig down your basement. And so it would help people also qualify themselves as to whether or not their house may have an opportunity within it or not, versus someone going into the program and realizing going through the building permit process, oh crap, like I can't feasibly do this. So I think if we outlined, if you're looking at just information and like a marketing brochure, I think would be super helpful if a program is launched, and I'd be happy to spend time on helping whomever else put it together. But say, does your basement have 8-foot clearance? Do you currently have windows? Do you have an area where you could add a door? And just provide a checklist for people to quantify and I guess qualify themselves if this is something that is worth considering, because they need some very broad, but I would say entry level qualifications to maybe consider doing a basement or doing a garage. And then also maybe providing them a pathway. First step, make sure you meet these pre-qualifying things. Second step, maybe have a contractor come through or have someone with a designation come through to let you know what you think costing would be, and have a set of plans done, how you submit your building permit, like providing a lot of details to help push them through the path successfully, I think would be a big thing to help encourage the success.
Actually, to that, Lindsay, I previously bookmarked a few locations that have that guide. Brant County is one. So as an example, it'd be a matter of probably taking what is out there and simply fitting it within our own zoning bylaw for the most part.
Good.
So
That's
yeah,
great.
I think it's a very valid point. You need to make it easy for people, or easier. Okay. So I think we recognize the merits of helping to create additional residential units in existing buildings, or obviously secondary to that on the outside. And we have made changes to enable that to happen. So the next step would be those incentives. So what I think before for our next meeting, I'd like to try and draw this topic to a conclusion. So I think what we'll do in the meantime is we'll get some feedback from Perth. We'll do some checking in maybe with Simcoe and a couple of other places that have had some success with the program. We will also check at the county level to see if there's any potential movement afoot to model what's happening in Leeds Grenville. And we'll come back and look to this group for a recommendation that we can bring to council on this topic. That sound reasonable? Okay, thank you. So the final agenda item, sorry, not the final, the second last agenda item, I should carry myself here. Third last, the portable housing benefit discussion with urban mayors. I'm not going to spend much time here because I know we're getting close on time. I have a meeting at 3 o'clock with the urban mayors and CAOs, and to discuss housing, affordable housing within Landlord County, especially in the urban areas, and particularly to the affordable housing benefit as per our last discussion. So I mentioned that we would reach out, and it just so happens that the time we get scheduled, everybody is this afternoon at 3. So I'll have more feedback for that subsequent to that meeting, certainly for our next meeting. Vicki?
Just before I lose you to the next meeting there, I was wondering if we could touch base possibly via email. I sent one out yesterday. It might have just got messed between the mass amounts of I was sending, but regarding these two people that or two couples that desperately require housing immediately, one being a couple that's a veteran and elderly, the other couple being a younger couple, both being in a hotel, desperate.
Let's try and get back to that in a minute, Vicki.
Okay. Thank you.
There's item E on the agenda, and what I'll let Lindsay go with. Lindsay wanted to speak first to the meeting we held, reference to the meeting we held last week on development charges.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll try to be quick. You can speak in before Sean leaves there too. But essentially, I've been advocating a lot on this committee, and I think a lot of people have been in agreement with it, that we should be charging development fees on new construction, and that because the town hasn't been receiving these fees, you know, we could really be using them towards affordability initiatives of whatever kind. And I attended the meeting last week, and the consultants that presented findings basically just outlined, and Sean, I may ask you to just verify this to me because I wasn't entirely sure, but I think I am, that development charge revenue, charges and the revenue from that can only be applied towards services that a town and or city provides. And so they have to fall under one of the existing services that are in place, which means that none of these fees may be able to be put towards any type of affordability initiative, which was a bit, honestly, a bummer when they kind of spoke about that with me on the meeting, because I was like, crap, this is what I've been really, you know, excited about. So I guess I've got 2 comments on that that I'm hoping maybe can be brought to council in the discussion when it comes to development charges, but, you know, those revenues that will be created from developers will now go towards a lot of services that are the taxpayers' money were funding. And with some additional funding coming in to go towards those services through budgeting each year, can we at least start really pushing towards affordability and draw from development charges? So I just want to update the group that the town cannot apply this money development fees towards for initiatives from the onset, and that it does just go to services like the fire department, like the police, but it probably does alleviate where they are spending money right now from their budget that they could put elsewhere in the coming years. So again, I was taken back that that's how it happens, but now I'm just wanting to make sure that we're all aware of it and that some discussions around that can be had at both this level and within the council too.
Thanks, Lindsay. And to my understanding, you're correct. And the province outlays a clear formula and prescription for the determination of what the maximum development charges that a municipality could charge. And in our situation, it's roughly 11,000 on a single family home, I think about 8,000 for a townhome. And that is based on the premise that growth would pay for growth. In other words, that a growing population would put more demands on the town's existing services, and we'd have to augment those services to meet the needs of a growing population. And that's exactly where development charges would be applied. Now, that said, that additional revenue, if we have a DC policy, which council will be addressing in March, if we do bring that in, that revenue would take pressure off the existing tax base. So the alternative to development charges is that if we didn't have it, it means the existing tax base would bear the burden of having to expand services to meet the needs of a growing population exclusively from tax. Development charges wouldn't pay the full cost, but it would certainly make a difference. And to use an example, if we had 50 townhomes built in town in 2022, which looks like a strong probability, had the DC policy been in place prior to now, prior to the issuance of a building permit, that would have been, say, $400,000 in revenue, which could be utilized by the municipality to pay for some of these growth-related initiatives. So, so thanks for bringing it up, Lindsay. And but I think it still remains relevant that we need to find opportunities within our existing town budget to support housing, and whether that is through things we do on our own or that we do through our partnership and our shared service agreement with the county. And that's my discussion at 3 o'clock and seeing what we can do there. Joanne, before we move on to the next subject, do you have a comment or question?
Well, wouldn't that also then what we were talking about with taking some money from the tax, like that 1%? So then wouldn't that increase what we would be able to apply for if you're using the money that what Lindsay has been championing for, like all these permits, and we have to put it against the police and all that. So it clears some of the budget so that money can be applied to the housing, what we're trying to get going in Smith Falls. Could it not?
Well, it's a relevant point, and I guess it comes down to council's overall conclusion on how best to support the affordable housing needs of our community, and whether that is, we've got a number of programs and incentives that have come out of our Housing Advisory Committee work, and including, as an example, the application for Cambridge Community Support for the 28 unit rent guaranteed income development at 44 Chambers, and the town's willingness to utilize our community improvement plan to waive property taxes there, or the bulk of property taxes there for 10 years. There's things like that we can forego revenue in those situations, and we also, I believe, will refund $10,000 in planning fees, also, which is a maximum on that project. So there's a multitude of things that we can do, and I think the feeling of this group to each person is that we need to do more, and the crisis we are facing today is modest compared to the crisis that will be coming down the road. The challenge that the council faces here is, do we do a made for Smiths Falls solution, or do we work with our municipal partners and try to develop a county-wide solution? And that specifically arose out of our discussions surrounding the affordable housing benefit. So we only got a few minutes left, so I'll leave that at that, because I'll have that discussion at 3. And report back, but we know our work is far from finished, and I think council feels positive about some type of financial support towards housing. The question is how best to do it, and rather than say rushing to a solution, the intention is to find the best solution for the long term. Okay, Vicki, we've got just a couple of minutes. And you have the last agenda item.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. Let me know if they reach back out to you, and I'm all ears. So basically, urgently needed a 1-bedroom apartment for an elderly couple that just suffered an apartment fire. Their insurance paid for 3 months hotel stay, and they've paid for an additional 2 months out of pocket. They are no longer able to pay, and they need a place like yesterday. I've reached out to Jeff. Jeff got me in touch with, he told me a multitude of people to contact. So I've told them to contact the Legion. They've contacted Veterans Affairs. They've gotten on the wait list, but they are number 500. Yeah, so I've tried to get them in touch with emergency funding, but I don't know if it will evidently work out. Ultimately, I'd just like to say, here's the keys, you know? Thoughts?
So, I hear on a fairly regular basis from people who are in a similar situation. I can steer them to the county. At times they're able to help, but that's a short-term solution, or it is to help with first and last, etc. But I do have contact information for some of the local landlords. So maybe what we will have to do is simply share that master list or create, I guess I've got a master list, but create a master list and share it so that people know who they can reach out to. But there's no question, it's a very difficult situation because every time a unit comes up, there are literally dozens of people who are applying for it. And unless
They
someone,
don't have the willpower or know how to get on Facebook and apply to everyone at this point.
exactly,
And that's who's suffering at this point. And
well,
so
you
I
mentioned,
think an immediate solution needs to be put in place. Do we have any emergency housing? Or is it only related to if you're a woman fleeing domestic violence?
even then, I believe it's a challenge.
Yeah, getting in. Trust me, I know. But I think that's something to also explore in the future, somewhat of emergency housing, because at this point we can't ignore it. Not that it's a solution, it is merely a Band-Aid. And what we really need to be focusing on is rent supplements. Because if we handed these people money, they'd easily have a house today.
So Vicky, let's connect offline. I'll get you some names of landlords and or property managers and numbers that you can reach out to.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
But we know it's a frustrating situation, and especially I suspect if it's an elderly couple, they also don't want flights of stairs. Right? They probably need something that's a little bit more accessible and appropriate for them. So, Joanne, hope you can help here.
I just wanted to say, like, maybe if you're able, Mayor, if you're able to find maybe some landlords that may be able to help out, maybe the Legion would be able to help out financially, like to get them set up with, like a few first month's rent or something like that. So like, don't just like, even if you've reached out to the Legion, if you do have a plan in set, call them again and just say, okay, here we go. We do have something, but now we just need a little bit more financial support. Maybe they'll be able to help you, okay?
And
Thank
Vicky,
you so much.
thank you, Vicky, for being such a good advocate.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, I've got to run. Thanks for your time and attention today. We haven't set a date for the next meeting, but Kerry will reach out before long to get that arranged. Thanks again, everyone. Take care. Allison, thank you for your participation today.
Thank you.